To call in. Raheem Kassam joins us, who was, Raheem, I think, a former senior advisor to Nigel Farage. Afternoon.
That's right. Hi, Tom. How are you?
I'm very well. What did you make of what Suzanne had to say? Is it right that she is ruled out from standing for the leadership of UKIP?
Well, I think it's right, having seen the evidence, and the National Executive Committee and the disciplinary panels both thought it was right. But what's more important is the High Court thought it was right. She took an appeal to the High Court to appeal against her suspension, and the court also found that it was right.
Well, the High Court found it wasn't right for her to bring the appeal against the suspension, not necessarily that the suspension was right.
Well, of course, but, if you have an appeal against a suspension, then presumably the appeal has to have some grounding, and it didn't. And she actually had a disciplinary panel appeal that she withdrew just last month. So I think, look, the following thing is that this, coming off the back of what she said. She's just had a go at the NEC. She's just had a go at the membership. People know that she tried to get Alan Craig deselected, David Curtin deselected as London candidates. This is somebody who doesn't have any affinity with the party, but has an affinity with being the leader of a party. And actually, she supports Andrea Leadsom in the upcoming Conservative contest. So do I. But I find it extraordinary. She's just had her own Theresa May nasty party moment. She's just effectively attacked the UKIP base. People are going absolutely wild about it right now on social media, and rightly so. There's no doubt that UKIP needs to move into a position where they have some sort of reform to a grassroots membership structure that is more appealing, like the Five-Star Movement in Italy. But that doesn't come about from a leader that attacks the membership of the party. We need somebody who unites, who has positive.
Well, she did say that grassroots isn't where the power is, and isn't that just that's a statement of fact, isn't it?
Well, I mean, that is the case in the sense that the grassroots doesn't take every decision inside the party. And like I say, Nigel and I actually flew to Milan to meet with the late Roberto Casaleggio a couple of years ago to figure out how you can put the grassroots in charge of more of the day-to-day.
And there's lots of interesting stuff about the way in which you change democracy based on what you can do on the internet that might give more power to the grassroots, which I think was what you were meeting about, wasn't it, if I remember correctly?
That is exactly correct. And I think, they've really laid the groundwork for that, and I think UKIP should follow. But the point is this. If UKIP decide, if the NEC decides, or anybody in the upper echelons of the party now decide that actually they're not going to abide by the suspension terms, that they're going to overturn and change the rules as a special case for Suzanne Evans, then I'm afraid people will lose confidence in the way the party is run, and it cannot be done. She had an appeal, she withdrew the appeal, end of story.
Is that because ultimately you are a bit worried that if she were able to challenge for the leadership, she might win?
No. Actually, no. Actually, I'm one of the people who think if she were to challenge for the leadership, she would lose quite badly. I think her reading on how the membership feels.
Would she lose against, for instance, say, you?
I think she would lose magnificently against me.
Do you want to put yourself up against? Do you want to go for it?
I think if they threw the rules out the window and they say, right, anybody can now stand to be UKIP leader, and she's in the running, then I would run against her, absolutely.
But you wouldn't run anyway? You wouldn't run regardless? Because there has been some talk about you.
There has. To bear in mind, it's mostly been my talk about me, by the way.
The echo chamber that is Twitter comes back round,
The echo chamber that is my Twitter feed. No, I will admit that. But I think there's somebody, and there are several people that are perfectly placed to lead this party. People like Stephen Wolfe, perhaps even somebody like Aaron Banks, who can put his money where his mouth is and lead UKIP into the future. Look, there was Vote Leave saying a year ago, we can't talk about immigration, we can't talk about immigration. The prevailing consensus about this referendum is not that immigration necessarily won the referendum, because as Suzanne rightly said, the people who were concerned about mass immigration were going to vote to leave anyway. But what immigration did do is it crowded out the false economic arguments that we saw the establishment rolling out every 5 minutes.
Well, isn't this part of what Suzanne has a very good point about, is being able to move UKIP on from just talking about immigration, just talking about the EU? And how do you persuade people who aren't persuaded by UKIP's argument on immigration to vote for them, because they have to disentangle from their own view of what UKIP is, that idea of immigration and UKIP?
I'm surprised that the architect, as she paints herself out to be, of UKIP's full-throated, wide-ranging manifesto, which didn't talk about immigration apart from 2 pages at the general election, is saying that it was too focused on immigration. It wasn't. I mean, I wrote the foreign policy section of the manifesto. You know, Paul Nuttall wrote the education section of the manifesto, and it was a manifesto that was independently audited. I don't buy this idea. Now, listen, I buy the idea that all the media wants to talk about with regard to UKIP is immigration, but I don't buy the idea that UKIP only wants to talk about immigration. I think the referendum campaign was something entirely different to the general election campaign. So I think she's all at 6s and 7s here.
There is a way of perhaps allowing UKIP to retreat from some of the things that were done during the referendum campaign, which will put a lot of people off what Nigel Farage became. Of course, Nigel Farage is now moving away from UKIP, so perhaps that brand has been lost by UKIP itself. But nevertheless, you've got to now appeal to a broader base of people than what you were appealing to before. What do you do that with? Because when I spoke to Nigel Hamilton last week, he started talking about solar energy farms.
Yeah, okay, fine. But the point is this. We have a Brexit negotiation that is going to take place between now and some point, let's say between now and the next general election. The concern that UKIP members have, at least from what I can see out there, is that we'll get a sort of pseudo-Brexit negotiation, that we might get, out of the European Union, but we'll also have to take freedom of movement, for instance. So the immigration thing can't come off the table entirely. I would argue that actually, when it comes to Brexit negotiations, it will be the most important sticking point. It will perhaps be the most important sticking point between the negotiators. Theresa May wanted to reduce net migration to 100,000. It hasn't happened. If she becomes Prime Minister, how do we know that's going to happen? We can't guarantee that. And that's why I think it's so naive to attack the UKIP members for talking about immigration when this is the main point of negotiation between now and 2020.
Let me ask you one final question that can be answered with one name. Who would you throw your weight behind now?
Can I say Nigel? No, I can't say Nigel.
Well, you can, but we know where that leads.
Yeah, well, no, at this point where we stand right now, I would probably back Stephen Wolfe.
Okay, Raheem, thank you for your time. Raheem Kassam.